There are moments in the world of professional sports that transcend the boundaries of athletics entirely. Moments that spill over into politics, culture, and the complicated, ever-shifting landscape of public opinion in ways that no publicist planned and no media strategist anticipated. Moments that begin with something small, a single sentence, a passing remark, a joke made in front of cameras, and end with something enormous, something that reverberates through newsrooms and living rooms and social media feeds for days, weeks, and sometimes years. This is one of those moments. And at the center of it, as has become almost customary in the modern era of baseball, stands one man whose silence speaks louder than most people's longest speeches, and whose words, when he finally chooses to offer them, carry the weight of something far greater than sport. Shohei Ohtani. To understand what happened, you have to go back exactly 1 year. The setting was a packed press conference room in the heart of Washington, D.C., the kind of event that draws cameras from every major American network and fills the room with the particular electric tension that exists wherever political power and popular culture intersect. Donald Trump, then in the full momentum of his return to the national stage, was holding a rally-adjacent media event that had drawn an unexpectedly wide audience, not just political supporters and journalists, but sports commentators, entertainment reporters, and millions of casual viewers who had tuned in out of pure curiosity. At some point during the event, with the comfortable confidence of a man who has spent decades commanding rooms, Trump made a joke about Shohei Ohtani. It was not a vicious joke. It was not a targeted attack. By the standards of political commentary, it was relatively mild. The kind of offhand remark that powerful figures make when they believe the moment calls for lightness and the room is warm enough to receive it. Trump noted, with his characteristic delivery and timing, that Ohtani was a tremendous player but that perhaps America should keep a closer eye on the guys who needed interpreters before signing them to $700 million contracts. The room laughed. The cameras rolled. The clip was shared millions of times before the event had even concluded. And then everyone waited to see what Ohtani would do. In America, the expectation was clear. Or at least, it felt clear to those who have grown up inside American sports culture, where athletes are increasingly expected to be vocal, visible, and unafraid to enter the arena of political and social commentary. The era of the silent superstar simply doing his job had, in many observers' minds, come to an end. Stars spoke. Stars responded. Stars used their platforms. To remain silent in the face of a public remark, especially one made by a figure as polarizing and high-profile as Donald Trump, was itself interpreted as a statement. Silence meant something. Silence was read, analyzed, debated. And Ohtani was silent. For 1 full week, he said absolutely nothing. He appeared at Dodgers practice. He took batting sessions. He worked with his pitching coaches on the mechanical adjustments he had been focused on since the start of the spring schedule. His interpreter fielded questions from the media cluster that gathered daily outside the facility with the practice calm of someone who had long since made peace with the gap between what journalists wanted and what they would receive. The media filled the silence the way media always does, with speculation. Some outlets suggested Ohtani was deeply offended and consulting with his management team about a formal response. Others argued his silence was itself a diplomatic masterstroke, a way of rising above the noise without dignifying it with engagement. A prominent political commentator on one of the major cable networks dedicated an entire segment to analyzing what Ohtani's silence revealed about the cultural differences between Japanese and American approaches to public conflict. A sports radio host in Los Angeles spent 3 consecutive mornings arguing that any player who wouldn't defend himself against a presidential joke didn't deserve the contract he'd signed. For 1 full year, the joke remained exactly that, a moment that had caused a brief uproar, generated enormous content, and then settled into the long archive of things that happened once and were never properly resolved. Until last Tuesday. The occasion was a formal dinner hosted at a prominent venue in Los Angeles, organized by a foundation connected to youth baseball development programs across the United States and Japan. The event had been planned for months, was attended by former players, current executives, community leaders, and a small, carefully selected group of media representatives. It was not a political event. There was no campaign energy in the room, no partisan flags or slogans. It was, by every measure, a gathering built around the simple and genuinely beautiful idea of growing the sport of baseball among young people who might otherwise never have access to it. Trump, now operating from a position of considerable renewed political authority, had sent a personal message of support for the foundation's work, a brief, warm statement that was read aloud during the opening remarks. It was the kind of gesture that powerful figures extend toward charitable causes, meaningful precisely because of who sent it and unremarkable in its content. What no one in that room expected was what happened next. When it came time for Ohtani to speak, he had been invited as the evening's honorary guest and had prepared brief remarks through his interpreter. He did something that stopped the room so completely that several attendees later described the silence that followed as the loudest thing they had ever experienced at a formal dinner. He addressed the joke directly, calmly, without anger, without theater, without the performative indignation that the American media had spent a year expecting from him. He acknowledged that he had heard the remark when it was made. He acknowledged that many people had waited for him to respond. And then he said something that no speechwriter had prepared and no media strategist had anticipated. He said that he had thought carefully about the remark for a long time. That in Japan, when someone speaks about you, even in jest, even in a way that carries an edge, it is not always the correct response to answer immediately with your own words. Sometimes, he said, the most respectful thing you can do is listen. To truly listen. To consider not just what was said but why it was said and what it reveals about the moment and the person who offered it. And having listened and considered for a full year, he had something he wanted to say. He said he respected Donald Trump. The room did not react immediately. There was a beat, a full, suspended second, in which the air seemed to hold itself completely still. And then the reactions came all at once, a wave of surprised murmurs, shifted postures, and the particular electric energy that fills a room when something genuinely unexpected has just occurred. Ohtani was not finished. He explained his words with the careful, measured precision that has always characterized his rare public statements. He said his respect was not political. He was not endorsing policies or campaigns or parties. He had no interest in American political divisions and understood that it was not his place, as a Japanese citizen playing baseball in the United States, to plant his flag in that contested ground. But respect, he said, was different from politics. Respect was something older and more fundamental. And what he respected about Trump, specifically, pointedly, without flattery or performance, was something he had observed from a distance over many years. He said he respected the fact that Trump, regardless of what anyone thought of him, had never pretended to be something he was not. That in a world full of people who carefully constructed masks and managed every public gesture for maximum approval, Trump had always been, for better or worse, exactly and completely himself. And in Japanese culture, Ohtani explained, his interpreter's voice steady and precise, there is a deep and ancient value placed on authenticity. On the courage to stand in your own truth without apology. On the willingness to be seen fully, without the protection of careful image management. He said that a man who is fully himself, even imperfectly, even controversially, deserves a form of respect that has nothing to do with agreement. And then, in a gesture so quietly Japanese that half the room missed its significance entirely, Ohtani gave a small, deliberate bow toward the direction of Trump's written statement, which was still displayed on the screen at the front of the room. By midnight, the clip had been viewed 60 million times. By the following morning, it was the lead story on every major American sports network and most of the national news outlets. The reactions split almost perfectly along the lines that define modern American public discourse, passionate, loud, and deeply certain on both sides. Trump supporters flooded social media with the clip, sharing it as validation. Progressive commentators expressed shock, disappointment, and lengthy analytical threads about the dangers of athletes lending even oblique credibility to divisive political figures. Japanese media covered it with a quiet pride that needed no amplification. Cultural commentators from across the political spectrum found themselves, for perhaps the first time in recent memory, genuinely uncertain how to categorize what they had just witnessed. Because what Ohtani had done did not fit neatly into any of the existing categories. He had not attacked. He had not defended. He had not stayed silent, and he had not performed outrage. He had done something far more disorienting to a media culture built on conflict and reaction. He had thought carefully for a full year, chosen his moment with precision, and then spoken with complete honesty about something as unfashionable and complicated as genuine respect for a person with whom he had no obvious reason to agree. Former players appeared on panels and struggled to find comparisons. Political analysts reached for historical precedents and came up short. One prominent cultural commentator, appearing on a prime-time broadcast, sat quietly for a long moment after the clip finished playing and then said simply that she had covered public figures for 25 years and she genuinely did not know what to do with this. In the Dodgers facility the following morning, Ohtani arrived at his usual time. He went through his usual routine. He stretched, he worked, he focused on the mechanical details of his craft with the same quiet intensity that has defined his approach to baseball since the day he first arrived in America. A young reporter, granted brief access to the facility, managed to catch him near the entrance and asked him a single question. She asked if he had expected the reaction his words received. Ohtani paused. He spoke briefly to his interpreter. Then the interpreter turned to the reporter and delivered his answer. He said that he had not spoken to create a reaction. He had spoken because a full year had passed and he felt the time was finally right to say what he genuinely believed. In Japan, he said, there is a concept that has no perfect English translation, the idea that words spoken at the correct moment, from a place of sincere reflection, carry a completely different weight than words spoken in the heat of reaction. He had waited for the correct moment. The reporter nodded, wrote it down, and later told her editor it was the most complete answer she had ever received to a question she had barely finished asking. In the weeks that followed, the conversation about Ohtani's words gradually evolved from shock and reaction into something deeper and more considered. Writers who had initially rushed to judge found themselves returning to the clip and sitting with it longer. Commentators who had issued confident takes in the first 24 hours quietly softened their certainty. What remained, when the noise finally began to settle, was something that could not be argued with or fully explained by the frameworks that American media typically uses to process public statements from famous athletes. Shohei Ohtani had looked at a moment that the entire world expected him to react to, had chosen instead to reflect for an entire year, and had then spoken from that reflection with a honesty and dignity that made everyone in the room feel, regardless of their politics, that they had just witnessed something rare. Not a press release. Not a calculated brand move. Not a performance of values for public consumption. Just a man, standing in his own truth, exactly as he was. In the professional world of American sports and media, where everything is loud and fast and certain, that kind of quiet, patient, unperformable authenticity had turned out to be the most powerful statement of all. And everyone who heard it knew it.